I want to talk about tonight for those of us, or those of you who are interested in military weapons, is one of the arms and vendors that's probably not as well known as most people would imagine. The man's name is James Paris Lee, or James P. Lee. He's really greatly overlooked as far as in the military arms what his contributions were. And just about anybody that owns a modern weapon today, probably that weapon is based on one of his patents, or more than one of his patents. And I'm going to jump around a little bit because the way things are laid out, there's two distinctly different types of weapons on the table, and they kind of overlap one another. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through one, and I'm going to jump back 10, 15 years and go to the other. But first what I want to do is to talk a little bit about this individual, James P. Lee. He was actually Scottish. His family moved. He was born in 1831 in Scotland. He moved to Canada 5 years later in 1836 with his mother and father. And he became interested in firearms at a very early age. Around the age of 12 years old, he actually started working on and built his first firearms. 12 years old now. Using some castaway parts from his father's gun collection, he unsuccessfully produced a weapon. I understand it didn't work, it's just family legend goes. But that perked his interest in firearms, which he continued on the rest of his life. Reading a little bit about him, he was a little bit klutzy, a little bit accident prone. In fact, on a hunting trip, shotgun discharged and put shot into the heel of his foot, which he had and annoyed him for many, many years into his old age. So I wouldn't want to say he's like the nutty professor, but apparently from what I read about this guy, he was a little, I would say eccentric, but a little bit on the klutzy side. But he contributed greatly to military firearms, and that's what we're really talking about here. Getting back to him, like it says, he was 1836 he moved to Canada. In 1858, with his wife and his two sons, he moved to the United States. Now, he married a woman by the name of Carolyn Chrysler of Chrysler Corporation, who later on would be Chrysler Corporation. That was the family he married into. And he was originally apprenticed as a watchmaker. His father was a watchmaker. He was apprenticed as a watchmaker, but he always had this keen interest in firearms. And that's really the direction he went when he ended up coming into the United States. He worked for both the Winchester and Remington arms companies at different times. He also had his own company, the Lee Firearms Company, and that's probably where he invented most of the alterations and different types of weapons that are on his table. Now, like it says, the United States, and I have one weapon here is not out of the family, but what I want to do is just use this as an example of the time frame that we're talking about. Now, I think everybody probably in this room here is familiar with this particular weapon. This is your single shot 45 caliber rifle used by the United States Army in different variations from about, where's John now? It was about 1866 to 1892 when they adopted the crack Jorgensen rifle. So this was the workhorse of the United States Army at the time. Single shot, center fire metallic cartridge, slide hammer on the gun. It utilized a socket bayonet, not much different from the old Civil War era firearms. And this was your standard infantry weapon. It came in a carbine configuration and a rifle configuration. So this was the weapon that was being used by the Army and the Navy for the most part in the 1870s and 1880s. Now, before that time, Lee was already working, worked for, well, he was independent. At the time of the Civil War, he was independent. And that's where he first, you see his name appear in anything to do with military weapons. In 1861, he got a contract with the United States Army for a patent to convert 1,000 model 1855 or 1861 rifle muskets into breech loaders. Now, I tried to do a little research on that, get a picture of one of these weapons. I was unable to. Apparently, they're extremely rare. But he had, in 1861, a workable patent and a design to convert existing muzzle-loading .58 caliber weapons to a breech-loading. I'm not sure if it was a bolt action or it was a hammer. I'm not really sure, but a workable breech-loading weapon. 1,000 units were made. Army, no interest in it at all. After the 1,000 were made. He also produced 200 44 caliber rimfire single-shot carbines. Now, one of those just came up for sale recently. They're pretty rare. They're a very interesting looking gun. But they're a single-shot, breech-loading metallic cartridge rifle rimfire. Once again, Army, no interest in them. And he kind of disappears after that. You don't see him. He actually went to work, I believe, for Remington Arms, and he was just worked in their shops. And, you know, I guess on his own, he was working on his own designs and things, but for the most part, he was working for Remington at the time. Around 1879, 78, 79, he reappears. I'll use the term reappears. He shows back up again with a weapon pack, and what he comes up with is this. Now, this is 1879.
Actually, in 1874, he developed it looked like a martini action, and I meant to bring it down tonight, and I forgot. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yes,
and the government took it, and they appropriated $10,000 in 1875 to manufacture them at Springfield Armory. And they made 143 Lee vertical rifles, and they ran out of money, and they stopped.
That was the end of it.
Yeah, it looked like it's sort of like a martini action, but it had a hammer that stuck up. You hit the hammer with the heel of your hand. It opened the action. You put a cartridge in, you pull the hammer back one click, and it closed the breech, and the second click, it cocked the fire.
So kind of like it looked like a rolling block then, sort of.
It was more like a martini.
Okay, with a drop gauge.
It was almost exactly like a martini.
The guy was very innovative. He came up with a lot of probably advanced, scary ideas for the military in those days. And of all of them, I mean, if you take a look at this particular rifle here, if I was to tell you that the concept of this gun dated back to the late 1870s, compared to this, it's like night and day. This gun here, which was manufactured through Remington. This is the Remington-Lee. Now, anytime you see the word Lee attached to a firearm, and we're going to talk a little bit about the British weapons, that's this man. This is James Paris Lee. He actually had the patterns for a couple of things we're going to talk about. It's going to be the box magazine, the stripper clip, and a opposing lug bolt that basically cocked on closing. Now, for anybody that's familiar with the 03 Springfields, 0383s, the Mauser actions, they cock on opening. Mauser's design cocked on closing. And what it is basically it opens very easily, but when you go to close it, that's when you cock it. You have to have a little effort, you got to push it to lock it down. Now, this gun here, I had it displayed with the cartridge, and it was not how it was supposed to be used, technically in the field. To entice the government to take this gun, he made it look as close to possible as he could the current Springfield rifle. If you look at these two guns together, they're the same height. He uses the same nose caps. Little difference in the cleaning rod. The barrel bands, the configuration, even the type of sights. This has got the old buckhorn sight on it. Some of these had the other type sight. He tried to keep this right in line with the standard 45 caliber single shot rifle. But instead of utilizing the hammer and a loading gate or a flip gate or a trap door, he went with his bolt action design and the clip. Now, talking about the clip, this, like I said, his three big contributions to firearms is the magazine, and this was his invention, the stripper clip, and this type of a bolt system. The military was not very fond of or like magazines. They were expensive to produce, and they were not considered disposable. And for the most part, most countries at the time that this gun was being designed or in use didn't see the advantage to having loaded magazines in a weapon. Also, they like to have control of their troops. This time, there's still the world of single shot. Craig Jorgensen, trapdoors, they were, although they were magazine rifles, they were afraid of these. These were going to utilize ammunition probably faster than they thought that they could bring it up. So the design of this gun was basically to be used as you see it right here. Now the cartridge belt for this gun has 4 pockets. It takes a clip. So the cartridge belt was supposed to carry 4 clips loaded, 20 rounds, and a pocket. And then on the other side, you had your 30 rounds of loose ammunition. Now, when the clip is out of this gun, there's a little loading cutoff that snaps across the bottom, closes the inside of the gun so the cartridge won't fall through. So in theory, the way this rifle was supposed to be used was open the bolt, draw 1 cartridge out, put the cartridge in, close the bolt, fire it. Open the bolt, take 1 cartridge out, close the bolt, fire. If you got to a certain situation where you maybe were going to be overrun or you needed to increase your rate of fire, you then could reach over to the other side, draw out one of your box magazines that was loaded with 5 rounds, insert it into the gun. Now you don't have to go and draw single cartridges out. You could leave the magazine in the gun and load the magazine that way, but the concept of this gun was actually designed where 4 of these magazines were considered expendable, but you're supposed to use, that was the last resort. You're supposed to draw individual rounds out, put them in one at a time. And, you know, like I said, I think, this is the model 1885, this is the model 1879. A little bit different, and the differences in these models are really in some of the safety features on the gun, the bolt handle. They all almost look alike. This is a Lee disc magazine. The other one was a Lee Cook magazine. It's a little bit different, but they all look the same. But the government only probably the Navy took an interest in these guns. The Army used them in very limited. They field trialed them. Some of the National Guard units, New Jersey was one of them. Did use these in 45-70. Now this gun, like I said, isn't 45-70 caliber, just like the trapdoor. They also were offered in .43 Spanish. They were offered in later on. Well, the black powder, the large caliber, they were offered in 45-70 and .43 Spanish. The model, this is a model 1885. The last model that they made was a model 1899, and it's called the small bore Remington-Lee. And that was offered in 30-40 Krag. It was offered in 6mm. It was offered in .43 Spanish, 45-70, 7mm, and 7.65mm. Now, other European countries did take an interest in this weapon. Most notably England, we'll talk about that after, but China ordered a lot of these. New Zealand ordered a lot of these. Most of them were ordered in .43 Spanish. Small countries, Chile, Argentina, a lot of South American countries like this weapon, and in the late 1880s did order these weapons and did arm their troops with this particular weapon. In this country here, the Army proper never, other than field trialed this weapon with a few units in the field, never adopted it as a permanent arm. The Navy did. The Navy did use these for a number of years. But the Navy was kind of like with weapons, was like changing underwear. They went through a number of different types of rifles in a short span of time, where the Army basically stayed with the tractor up to the Craig Jorgensen. New Jersey National Guard, at some point in time, did use these. I have a cartridge belt and bayonet that's all stenciled on the inside from NJ, New Jersey. So New Jersey National Guard did use. Michigan National Guard ordered these guns in 30-40 caliber. and used them, the small bore in 30-40 caliber. So some of the countries did. Now, states did. It's not. I have never had an opportunity to shoot this gun. It probably shoots no different than a trapdoor Springfield. It is black powder, 45 caliber, 500 grain bullet. So it's, you know, someday I maybe hope to pop around through it. But in 1885, England ordered 300 of these weapons to be field tested over in England. And this is really where he got his most, his weapons saw their most use. And the United States kind of like backed away from, oh, also, this gun was designed to use the standard socket bayonet, like on the tractor. So, I mean, he tried to give the government, the Army, everything they wanted. And this would have been a fine weapon, but the Army didn't, the United States Army did not have any interest in a magazine-fed rifle. England took these guns, and for those of you who are aware of colonial empire or England, in 1888, they came up with this. Now, this is what's referred to as the long Lee rifle, or the Emily, or the Lee-Metford, and later on the Lee-Enfield. The difference, and when I talk about this gun, remember when we talk about the Metford part of this gun. The original concept of this gun is the Lee bolt system with the basically cock on closing. Got his Lee magazine system, and the British, like I said, they chained this thing right to the gun. It was not to be removed, except for cleaning. They reduced the caliber down to .303. Now, this in its original configuration was designed as a black powder weapon. The American version was a .45-70. The British took this and reduced it down to .303 caliber. This is the gun that saw most service through Sudan, the war in Sudan, and with Kitchener's army. If you ever see the movie The Four Feathers? This is the gun. This is the gun through that big imperial time of England, the early part of the Boer Wars, before the short Model E came out. England, like all the other countries, was not interested in a fast loading magazine rifle, and they incorporated a couple of different little things into the Lee system. Like I said, same magazine, vertical magazine. This is a Model 96, so it's a 10 round instead of the old 5 round. It is chained. You have to actually cut this chain to get this off. This won't come off without removing the chain. But what they added on to this gun was basically a magazine cutoff. And the magazine was to be loaded. And in English, like I said, the concept here he tried to sell was carry 4 magazines loaded, loose cartridge on the other side. The British had a different idea. 1 magazine, you load the magazine, you set the cutoff over, and that's basically emergency reserve ammunition. The original Lee-Metfords did not have a dovetail or a cutout to use a stripper clip. This is basically a single shot rifle. Now, if you know anything all about old British equipment, they used to carry what was called Slade Wallace pouches. Basically, it was a suspender setup, like a Y strap. We used to have 2 big white pouches on right here in the front. If you've ever seen pictures of that, like the Boer Wars and the earlier wars, those are boxes just of loose ammunition. And what you basically did was you took 1 bullet out, you put 1 bullet in, closed the bolt, you fired the gun, you opened the bolt, you reached in the pouch, took 1 out, put it in. When the situation arose, an officer could give you the command, and only then could you do it. You could open up the magazine cutoff. By sliding that out, it lets the cartridges come up. Now you can work them off of the bolt. So the earlier models of this gun, this long Lee stayed in service until around, manufactured until around 1904, 1907. Later on, by the early 1900s, they were designed to be taken with a clip. Load them with a stripper clip, similar to what they used in the short model Lee-Enfield. Now, the problem with these guns, in its original configuration, and where it gets its name, Lee-Metford, it used Metford rifling. Now, for those of you who know anything at all about Metford rifling, it's a rounded, cornered, very shallow rifle. Works good with black powder. Does not work good with very hot burning cordite smokeless powder. Now, the action in the gun can withstand those kind of pressures. Problem is the rifling wouldn't. So these guns were all designed, it's Lee and Metford, meaning the rifling gun. The original Lee-Metfords, after about 6,000 rounds, the barrels were shot out of these things. So what they did was, in 1896, and that's when they brought in the smokeless powder, or the cordite powder, in the .303 round, what they started to do was just rebarrel these guns and also manufacture them from new. Now, this gun here was rebarreled, and what they did was, you guys, afterwards you're welcome to come up and look at the weapons. If you look on the top of the receiver here, this is stamped with an E. This is telling you that it has E for Enfield rifle. So it's still the old configuration of the old Lee-Metford, but it now has it all has Enfield rifling in it, which now it'll withstand or hold up to the smokeless powder. You could probably still shoot either cartridge out of this gun; it wouldn't hurt. But it's got the Enfield rifle in it, it's far superior. They were all equipped with a knife bayonet. Now, the early ones also had a clearing rod, and it was not a cleaning rod. These guns, it was a clearing rod. It was actually to remove a jammed casing. And the bayonet went over top of this. There you go. The later guns, the stocks were closed, and on this lug for the bayonet here, there's a hole in here for the clearing rod to go through. And if you don't see that clearing rod hole, as you know, it's actually a Lee-Enfield. It was a later made gun, and they'll probably have a loading gate in for a clip. By 1904, they were just like they did in the United States. The idea of the 1903 Springfield was to come up with a dual-purpose rifle. Instead of making a carbine for the cavalry and the long rifle for the infantry. If you ever take a Krag Jorgensen carbine and a Krag rifle and put an .03, the .03 falls right in the middle. Well, the British basically did the same thing, and with the next rifle that they came up with, which continued to use all of James Paris Lee's designs, this is your famous SMLE, or short model Lee-Enfield, or a Smelly. British like to give odd names to their guns. It's basically the same rifle. It's to do dual purpose. It was basically to cover, so now you can use make one gun for both your mounted troops, your cavalry, and your infantry. This is a Mark III with an asterisk, which stands for a sub. It's a sub design. It's some small changes. This is probably your most common type of short model Lee-Enfield. The Mark IIIs with the asterisks were wartime, World War I time produced guns, and they were pretty much the stripped down version of the earlier model, which still had, up to I think the Mark II, had the loading gate cutoff. Also, as I showed some of the guys earlier, this gun still had the old Arcanic volley sights on the side of it. Now, some of your early short model Lee-Enfields also had them. And the idea here with this was, basically, when the British were still fighting in ranks, 2 ranks, sometimes 3 ranks, volley firing, ranks of men, and for long range. You know, if you see the beginning of that movie, the Four Feathers, when the Fuzzy Wuzzies were coming across the desert, they could line these men up at 600, 700, 800 yards and just start volley firing at them. So they had these volley sights on the side of them, which they did, and I don't know, John, do you know what, was it the Mark II that they removed them? The Mark III doesn't have them. Was it only made by the Mark I?
They stopped it because of, production costs.
Yeah, it was a production. Also, there was kind of...
Yeah, the Mark III had the sights. The Mark III Star, that was one of the changes, was loss of volley sights and loss of the cutoff.
Okay, so the 3, without the asterisk, still had the volley. Right.
Had volley sights and a magazine cutoff.
They were still carrying at that late.
1914, because I had a couple 1914, 1915 versions, and they have the volley sights and the cutoff.
Obviously, by World War I think people realized that that type of fighting was long gone, and you weren't going to need volley sights on any type of gun anymore. So this gun here basically had a really long service life, and I believe still in some parts of the world it's probably still used. In the 1980s, it was still a frontline piece for some British Commonwealth countries, but the short model Lee-Enfield became really the workhorse of the British Commonwealth and the Army. And there's your two big variations now. At the same time he was developing that, he developed this kind of interesting weapon right now. This had at one time the distinction of being the smallest caliber U.S. gun. I know that has now been changed. I mean, it's .236. I don't know what the data around is and all.
223.
Okay. This was when he went to work for Winchester, he tried to entice the government into looking into this. And this gun was actually submitted for field trials when they were looking at the Krag-Jorgensen rifle. Now this is the 6mm straight pull rifle. Got a very interesting design bolt system on it. It uses his next invention, which was the stripper clip. Taking the 5 loose cartridges instead of a box magazine, building the box magazine into the firearm, making it part of the receiver, and now loading it with stripper clips. So here's two big contributions to the military: is the box magazine and the stripper clip. Now you can carry clips held together with a very cheaply made piece of tin, which is inexpensive. You don't need to go scurrying around looking on the ground for the magazine afterwards. Load the gun, and then you can peel off the. That's now we know why this was not a successful gun. You could load and fire it 5 times. Problem with this gun was it had a very small reduced caliber. It was a 6mm. It fired a cordite powder, because that was your early smokeless powder that was being used, and it had Metford rifling in it. Now, I don't know why he decided to use, because I know the United States Arms did not use Metford rifling in the trapdoors, correct, John? There's no Metford rifling.
Yeah, they were regular rifling.
Right, even, this is a 95, 1892, the Krag was out, that's not Metford rifling. I don't know why he incorporated Metford rifling into this weapon, but this was one of its biggest problems. Navy started to find the same problems that the British had with the Lee-Metford, with the smokeless powder. They weren't getting many shots out of the barrels of this gun because, at least that was 30 caliber in essence. This is 6mm. It was extremely difficult to clean this gun in the field. Very hard to clean it. All he gave it was a little pull-through on a rope to clean this gun on a wire brush. So the soldiers weren't able to facilitate cleaning in the field very easily on this gun. So the cordite powder was just eating the rifling up. And then the second problem was with the bolt design. Now this is a really nice idea for a straight pull, as it is. But to make this all work, there's some really small, intricate parts on this bolt. I shouldn't say intricate, temperamental parts. The extractors were known for breaking in this gun. The ends of the extractors, the claws, were known for breaking. And also, the original model gun, the extractor spring was a separate little piece that had a little dowel pin and just held it in against the extractor, which held it against the side of the receiver. And what happens is when you open and close the gun, if that spring breaks, or when the soldier takes it apart, puts the extractor down, the spring falls off, you lose the extractor spring, the extractor doesn't work. So they were having a lot of problems in the field with these guns. So they were really pulled out of service. They were used a very short time by the Navy, from about 1895, 1900, they were done. Now they were still found on some secondary ships during the 1920s. They were still in service on some boats, but as a frontline weapon, they had been replaced by the 30-40 Krag and then ultimately replaced by the 1903 Springfield. It's one of those interesting guns. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for them. This one here actually was my dad's. As a kid, he bought this. He probably got it from Barron's, where so many people got them. And my father used to call this gun a 22 on steroids, because that's about what it is. I only had an opportunity to shoot it once. It was interesting when I did shoot it, but it's one of those guns that's kind of overlooked with gun collectors. It's got a really interesting action. The other downside about this gun is once you load it, you cannot unload it without popping. You have to put it on safety. Other guns you can lower a bolt and leave around, and you can't do that with it. So once you close the bolt, you chamber around. The only way to unchamber it is to take the safety off, and there's a fly release to open it up. It's an interesting weapon. I think it was more of a novelty than really. But in usage, his concept with the gun is you never had to lower it down to open the bolt. See, he was utilizing this because you could keep this gun right up on your shoulder, and you could basically fire it, pull the bolt back, and you never have to lower the gun. The idea is good, but the design of the gun is not. It's not. And in fact, recently there's been a few accidents with people finding these guns, and the problem is, I believe, from talking with a couple of people, and we were just talking about the individual. A lot of these guns turn up on the market, and they're parts guns. What happens is you used to find these at some of the gun shows, and they would be missing bolts and missing. People put these things together because they get a pretty good price for it. A full, complete military musket like this goes for a few $1,000s. So it's worth it to somebody to put one of these together. The problem is as we all know, you have headspace issues and other stuff. And I believe the gun that the individual had that was killed, that was a parts gun. And I don't think he probably ever had it checked out by a gunsmith whether it was safe to shoot. This one here, like I said, I know it's safe to shoot. My dad had it. And the other one here is an interesting. This is actually a first contract gun. There's a little differences in the two. This is a second contract. This gun was made for the naval militia. This gun was actually featured in the book that was written on the straight pull Winchester-Lees. This is number 71 for the naval militia. This gun I've never had it checked out. I've never fired it either, but I'm pretty sure this one here probably is one of those unmonkeyed with ones. You can, a lot of times you can tell, as soon as you look at the guns, you see all the parts, some of the stuff, just what do you call it, the patinas don't match on a lot of them. But that's it. Now, what I want to do is at this point, because there's really not a whole lot to tell you about these weapons. If anybody has any specific questions about them.
They're used in the boxer battle by what, the Marine?
Marine Corps. This was strictly, the straight pull Lees, the Winchester-Lees, straight pulls, whatever you want to call them, were strictly a Marine gun. Now, the Navy did order these guns, and if your ship was large enough to have a Marine contingent on board, they would have been armed with these, or earlier, with the Remington-Lees. On-board ships, on capital ships, only capital ships, battleships and such, in their armories, up until 1899, these are what were in there. The battleship Maine went down with quite a number of these, and this one here just misses the serial number range for being that issued to battleship Maine. Like I said, the Navy only had, I think, 15,000. I don't know how many, 20,000 of them they ordered all total.
We ordered 10 in the first contract and 5 in the second.
Yeah, 15,000. Now, Will brought a very interesting piece here, and I've only seen one of these before at a gun show. This is actually, and they did it with the Remington-Lee, this is a civilian commercial version of what's called the military musket. Now, it is the identical gun. Same length, the barrel, everything's the same sight. All they did was they cut the stock off a little bit forward of the barrel band here. It does not have a swivel barrel band on it, and it just does not have any naval inspector acceptance marks on it. And this is in 6mm, and this was the commercial version that was available to the John Q. public if you wanted to own this gun. It's in 6mm. Same with the Remington-Lee. This was also offered in a commercial version for hunting if you wanted to hunt it. And actually, after the military had no interest in these any longer, they did continue to produce them. I think well into the early part of the last century, they were still commercially available. The Remington-Lees were still commercially available, and 30 caliber, they could continue to make them. I personally have never come across any of them. I've never seen them. I have not seen any of the small bore Remington-Lees. I would like to own one of them in 30-40. or one of the smokeless powder, but I have not seen any come up for sale. I don't know what the amount of them that they made. But yes, these were strictly naval guns. I don't know of any Army forces that ever used them. The Remington-Lee, yes, some Army troops, Army forces did use them, but the Winchester-Lee or the 6mm Lee, no. It also has a distinction, unless of course that's been broken also, it did also have the distinction of having the shortest knife bayonet. This is shorter than the M1 bayonet. I don't know about the one currently for the M16 or the newer weapon. This is just about 8 inches long. This is a pretty short little knife bayonet. But then I guess the Marines never intended to get that close to anybody. They were such good shots, right, Dave?
Yeah, real fast, the individual who got killed by firing the Remington-Lee, Lee Navy, sorry, he had acquired the gun, it was missing some parts.
There you go.
And he found a company in Texas, whatever, that specialized in the parts. Because I remember talking to his wife, he was so glad he got the package, the parts were there. And when they did the autopsy, the investigation, the doctor contacted Bob McKinnon, who passed away recently, was a member of our club, and because they couldn't identify the projectile that had been launched into his skull and eventually killed him. It was the ejector spring.
The ejector spring.
And that was one of the parts that he had purchased to restore the gun the week before the accident. It was a combination of possibly the ammunition, the condition of the gun, and that spring being put into.
Here's your ejector. This gun comes apart quite easily. And the only thing that holds this ejector on the gun is a small piece of steel on the side that just sits in. That's it. And the spring here, a little piece of spring steel. Now, this is a later version where it has a blind rivet holding the spring onto the ejector. Earlier, it was just a little pin. When the soldiers would take these guns apart out in the field, the thing would fall on the ground, and then they'd be like, uh-oh. Now, you can get it to work. I've seen you can get it. You got to hold the gun sideways and kind of bang it a little bit. You got to get this little thing to drop over and grab the groove of the cartridge, and then you could extract it. But that's not really good in a combat situation. But the gun, like I said, it has a very long firing pin. The firing pins tend to break, and that's one reason why I don't like really dry firing the gun too much. There's no way to lower this firing pin safely once you cock it. The sergeants used to carry spare extractor springs and firing pins. They were constantly changing in these guns. So once these guns were really put into use in the field, that's where they found their deficiencies, and then they found that they probably were not a really practical gun for combat. Quite sure maybe you could have redesigned it a little bit. It would have turned out a bit of a nice gun, but as it stood now, it wouldn't hold up the rigorous test of combat, at least the way the Marines were going to give it. I didn't hear. I heard no problems with them during the Boxer Rebellion. There were problems with them during the Philippine insurrections. After that, I do know. But during the Boxer Rebellion, when they besieged the legation in Peking, I don't know of any problems with them.
Which of the two variants was used by the Marine Corps during the Boxer Rebellion?
It's this one here. It's what they call straight pull.
Straight pull. That was the first variant.
What?
First one you held up, or the second one?
They're both the same. This is actually the first contract and second contract. It's just a little difference in the. It all depends. The first contract guns were the ones that came out in like 1895, and like they didn't make. I made 10,000 of these, and they only made about like 5,000 of the other ones. So I mean, Peking was 1900. So I mean, it could have probably been either or. And that's one of the. Actually, there's not many photographs of Marines armed with these guns. And that's one of the few times that you actually see Marines, you can actually see them armed with the cartridge belts and the guns, is in those pictures in Peking. There wasn't really a lot of pictures ever taken of the Marines armed with the straight pull during the Spanish-American War, because really, they weren't used a lot. Spanish-American War, I don't know what the Marines' involvement was in the Philippine insurrection. The next big thing that you see the Marines are is the Boxer Rebellion. Now keep in mind, the Marines that were involved in that were the Marines that were besieged in legations. The men that came to get them was the Army. They came across with Craig Jorgensen's. By 1900, the Marines basically,
Marty, even the Marines that went to relieve them were armed.
oh, crack chargers, yeah. They were already
Only the
switching
ones that
over.
were originally
By
there.
1900, the Marine Corps had finally given up being opposite of the Army. The Navy did. And the Army and the Navy both adopted the 30-40 caliber crack charging rifle. Prior to that, the Navy had maybe 2 or 3 different types of arms in service. The Army only had one, but the Navy had 2 or 3 different. There was just that bumping heads there.
Art, in one of the old Bannerman's catalogs, when the Maine went down, there were like, I think it was 30 or 40 trapdoors.
Yes.
That when they raised it, they got the trapdoors out, and they also got about 6 of the...
No, there's a number of them. I actually almost bought one of them.
Yeah.
Price tag was a little bit too high. The fewest number were the trapdoors. There was like 27 trapdoor Springfields recovered from the
They had
Maine.
more of the...
More of the straight pulls.
Yeah.
You know, the funny thing is a number of those straight pull Lees have turned up for sale. They know the serial number because there's a famous
Serial
copy of the
numbers were
serial number.
recorded, yeah.
There's also the serial numbers of the trapdoors.
Trapdoors,
To date, not one of those trapdoors has ever shown up in anybody's collection, yet Bannerman sold, there was like 27 of them that were sold. None of them have ever
They
shown
bid
up.
on it, and they got the whole lot off the Maine.
Yeah, they got the whole lot. They got the recovered, the guns that were salvageable. And realize these guns were taken out of the water within like a week or two. Even at that point, there was, they said, I know somebody that owns one of them, he shot it. He has shot it. They're serviceable, they're not that bad. They took them apart, cleaned them really good, but because they were underwater, they didn't want anything to do with them. And they were sold. Now, some of them probably look far worse now just from neglect from being in collections than they were in 1898 when they were recovered. But a number of the Lees have showed up. None of the trapdoors have ever showed up in anybody's collections. Unless John's got one, he's not telling us about it. But yeah, and they were model 1884 trapdoors, I believe, by the serial numbers. I looked them up. None of them were the ramrod. None of them were the ramrod
Now I
bayonet
gotta
trapdoors.
go look them up.
The numbers. Questions, please. That's, I mean, really, I know things, but I don't know what to tell you. So, I mean, if you got any specific.
Can you explain a little bit about the Medford rifle? The differences from...
The differences between, first of all, the Metford rifling it was a rifling group designed for a black powder cartridge. Now, the black powder, as we know, is not as, it's corrosive. It's got sulfur and potassium nitrate in it, but it's not as corrosive and not as hot as the nitrated powders, the cordites. So the Metford rifling was a very, very shallow groove. It's not very deep, and it contoured. If you were to look at it, it has a rounded appearance to it. Whereas the Enfield rifling is square cut and it's deeper. Now, there's more grooves in the Metford and less on the Enfield, John? One of them's a 4, one of them's a 6.
The British experimented a lot with Medford rifling and Joseph Henry rifling. So all your Martini Henrys were Henry rifling, and they were suitable for black powder. But if you look at a Martini Henry and look down the bore, it looks like the grooves are black because they're really rougher than the square cut rifling. And the same with the Medford. It's more rounded.
It's round, and it's not very deep.
Supposedly it worked for black powder.
Right, that's what it says. The problem is when they adopted this gun, they already were looking at a smokeless powder cartridge. But I read somewhere that they, just like in the United States with the crack Jerkson rifle, they didn't quite have it worked out yet. So the gun went into service still using a black powder cartridge. By the time they worked the kinks out of their smokeless powder cartridge, the gun was designed to withstand those pressures. They didn't realize the rifling wasn't good. I've never figured out why in the United States and by this time he was an American citizen, he was an American arms manufacturer. These guns were not, the British guns, they just adopted an American design. Why he just took, and I think that this gun is the only gun that ever utilized Metford rifling in the United States.
Yeah.
Why he went with a Metford rifling in the Winchester-Lee, I have no idea. It was a British type rifling. I don't know why he adopted it into the Winchester-Lee. But that was the problem. It's the problems with this gun. I was just say problems. I mean, in the service life in the British, the long Lee, had a long distinguished service life and no problems. The only problem they had with it was very early on when they were switched over from their, basically they figured they were just, when they were ready with the new cartridge, we could load it right in the gun. The problem is that they found that after 6,000 rounds, we had a problem. So what they did was they basically just rebarreled the guns, put Enfield rifle in them.
If I remember correctly, the only other country that went to Medford rifling was Japan.
They used many Arasakis?
Yeah, and I think what they did is with their 99s, because they were chrome lined and the Medford rifling, they didn't get the problem everybody else did. Because for a while there, I think people were being faked out. They'd look at a Japanese rifle and they'd look through, oh, this is worn out, this has been shot out. And it wasn't. It was because I think they had used a Medford type rifling on it. I wish we had a Jap rifle to take a look at.
Is the Medford rifling the same as what the Japanese rifles refer to as segmental rifling, where it's actually just a curve with turn twists?
With the Medford, you don't have the sharp corners on the
It's
rifle.
rounded.
It's a rounded corner. And
But the
it looks
segmental
like,
rifling, you have no corners at all.
yeah,
It's a twisted,
it looks like it looks like you shot out your barrel.
yeah.
Yeah. They're also, from my understanding, is the Enfield rifling has fewer grooves, but they're deeper. The Medford has more grooves and they're shallow. Yeah,
But
some of
the Enfield rifling usually was 5 grooves.
Yeah, fine.
5, and I think the Medford was more. I thought it was more, something it was, but it turned out it's fine for black powder, not good for smokeless powder. I mean, this gun here, I could basically shoot either cartridge out of this gun. It's just more cleaning when you're done. But in British service, the way these guns were used, at 6,000 rounds was unacceptable for a gun to have to be taken out of service. I mean, they were going the mad minute, 10 rounds out of the gun. I mean, you shoot these guns out in a short time.
I just have a statement. One of the things that you've noticed on the Lee Navy head stamp on the ammunition, obviously it's going to say 236. The 236 is actually between land to land. Wherever you look at
Groove to groove.
groove to groove, it's 243. So that's when you look in the data books. Why are they going to use a 243 size
Right.
bullet? That's the reason why.
So that's it. I mean, this was just kind of an on-the-fly thing. I mean, if you have any questions, you guys can come up and take a look at the weapons closer. I mean, it's, you know,
Keep asking
just wanted to give you guys a little, insight on somebody here who really, if you think about it, this man here, if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't have right now basically guns that use the box magazine, guns that use the stripper clip, and in a sense, you know, one of the bolt variations. His big contribution was a stripper clip in a box magazine, which basically is standard. Became standard on every military weapon from the 1890s on.
When you think about it, the U.S. hasn't used another box magazine since the AR.
Correct?
That's a long time, so they went
Yeah,
back.
did not want a detachable box
I
magazine.
gotta,
Oh, please, don't give me another one.
that was a splendid talk, and if it
Yeah.
hadn't been for Lee, we wouldn't have had this talk, so I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
It was good.
You know, he died in 1904, and he never. I mean, he got to see his weapons really used in quite a number of conflicts.